Hello, welcome to Shaka Extra Time, a show that comes to you every Tuesday. Joining me from his home is Shaka Sali himself, aka the Kabale Kid. Hello, Shaka.
Hello, Paul.
How are you?
Well, like I told you, man, I keep remaining simple, easy, and as some of my fans have suggested, an awesome son of Africa.
Very good. I like your colors. You look exquisite.
Thank you. You feel and think that I am perhaps ready for prime time?
Well, you've been on prime time. Maybe you're bigger for the bigger screen now, Hollywood, not just prime
Not
time.
not Andy Warhol's 15 minutes of fame, huh?
No, you're ready for Hollywood.
I see.
Yeah. So there is so much to go through. Let's maybe start with elections. Several African countries. Let's start with Burundi. Burundi finally went to the ballot box after a very interesting campaigning period. A lot of people had suggested that maybe perhaps people should not even subject themselves to this campaigning and later on voting. But the country's leadership said, no, we have to go ahead as planned. And they sure did and went ahead. As we speak, they've held an election. Your thoughts on that, Shaka?
They held an election.
Yes.
There are people who actually characterize it as a selection, especially if you look at the prevailing circumstances of the coronavirus pandemic. When you think about the business of lockdown, you think about the business of social distancing and all that kind of stuff, there doesn't seem to remain any space, any political space that would probably allow individual parties to have the freedom so that they could have unfettered access to people and sell their message.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I saw leading into the election, one of the leading opposition figures, I guess the person who has been opposition leader for a very long time, Gaston Ruwasa, being tortured and harassing him for, I guess, for reasons unknown or known to those guys who are in leadership in Burundi.
That is indeed, you accurately called it. I think it would be fair to regard him in terms of the Burundian politics as a veteran opposition politician, a man that has been, in fact, at the helm of a party that claims to represent the vast majority ethnic community, the Hutu, and is in fact called Paripe Hutu. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. But from what I read or what I've been seeing, he seems to be neck and neck with the hair.
Are you talking about Major General Evariste Ndayishimiye?
Yes, the guy who was hand-selected by the outgoing president.
That is a very interesting man, by the way. I had the opportunity to be received by him in the Burundian capital of Bujumbura. I was part of a delegation that he received in 2016, and he was, in fact, the chief of staff of President Pierre Nkurunziza, which means good news. And he actually took us to meet with the president. And we talked with him. He struck me as a gentleman, given, of course, that he's a senior military officer. He clearly struck me as someone that was an officer and a gentleman. And he seems to be respected very widely, especially by his peers and some businessmen in the region, that kind of stuff.
How about the fact that, yes, he's a hand-picked guy. He's going to take over from Pierre Nkurunziza. But there are a lot of skeptics out there who say that he's not any different. If anything, he's been the guy who has been enforcing the bad things any autocrat or any leader who has had the privilege of serving their people, not as a leader, but as somebody imposed on them. He's been the guy really doing that on behalf of Pierre Nkurunziza.
I don't honestly consider myself a sort of political prophet. I am the kind of guy that is persuaded and goes by the facts. I'll have to be a little bit patient, wait and see how he performs, whether in fact he reads from the script supposedly handed to him by his former boss, President Pierre Nkurunziza, whether he actually comes up with his own script, a script that perhaps reflects the interests and the concerns of the interests of the people of Burundi. Because, you know, there are so many cases on the African continent when we talk about political transitions. There have been many, many leaders who have tried to single-handedly pick specific individuals to replace them and succeed them so that they could protect them and protect their families and their friends. And in some fewer cases, it has happened. I remember, for example, in 1985, I was a graduate student at the University of California, Los Angeles, and I had gone to Tanzania to conduct my PhD research. That is the time that Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere stepped down from State House.
Right.
And he single-handedly, personally chose a gentleman by the name Ali Hassan Mwinyi. He made him his successor. It was expected that Ali Hassan Mwinyi would very closely follow his script. And he probably, in many ways, actually didn't have a choice. He did for some time, especially because, yes, he became the president of United Republic of Tanzania, but Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere retained the position of the chairman of the ruling party, Chama cha Mapinduzi. And at that time, we were talking about a one-party state, and the state, in fact, was subordinate to the party. And there's no question that for the most part, Ali Hassan Mwinyi followed the script. But it reached a point where Ali Hassan Mwinyi became Ali Hassan Mwinyi. And as a matter of fact, he came up with major economic reforms to the extent that even up to today, Ndugu Paul, Ali Hassan Mwinyi is credited for opening up the economy in Tanzania, privatizing it because it was largely state-controlled. As a matter of fact, it reached a point where sometimes they would be going for major events in Ilala Stadium, one of the most important stadiums in the commercial capital Dar es Salaam. And Nyerere would come and they would say, Mwalimu, Mwalimu, Mwalimu. And it is said that Ali Hassan Mwinyi came later and the whole place went crazy, said, Ruhusa, Ruksa, Ruksa, that he gave them permission to be able to be businessmen, businesswomen, and all that kind of stuff. But again, Mwalimu was also really not your average type of African leader. He had the character. He had integrity. He had impeccable credentials as a leader. He was, if I might be a little bit blunt, he was not a thief, unlike a lot, perhaps, of his peers. He wasn't a thief. He was a man that made mistakes and admitted them, admitted having made mistakes, and even if he actually did mistakes, he actually meant well. He was not a rich guy. He would actually be so mad when his children, for example, would go to private doctors and bring him a bill. It is said that at one time, he actually called the doctor who had treated one of his sons, and he had to negotiate how he was going to pay the bill. And he told his son that next time, please, go to Muhimbili just like your other ndugus.
Interesting.
Yes, that was Nyerere.
Mm.
But there are other cases that have obviously been very different.
Mm.
You look at Angola, where you had a president, Jose Eduardo dos Santos.
Yeah.
He also personally picked a gentleman, a man that was from the
Joao Lourenço.
Joao Lourenço. You know, Joao Lourenço, it was understood, was going to be reading from the script that had been given to him by his, the guy that made him president. But guess what? Mr. Lourenço, immediately, he stepped out of the shadow of Jose Eduardo dos Santos and completely ignored the script of the man that made him president and actually read from the script, which he says was the script of the vast majority of the Angolans. One of his number one issue that he had to deal with was corruption.
Going after the Eduardo family.
After the Eduardo dos Santos family, and you know, it had the reputation, by the way, of perhaps being one of the richest families on the African continent.
Still is.
In particular, Isabel dos Santos.
Yes.
His daughter. He was reputed, at least according to some of the
Forbes magazine and other
Forbes magazine and some other reputable magazines that usually come up with lists of some of the richest individuals in the world or in different countries. She was, according to Forbes magazine and other sources, the richest female in Africa. And guess what? She probably wouldn't want to be called something like that because the last time I checked, most of her assets, most of her bank accounts, they were reportedly frozen.
But in fairness to her, she's been fighting. She's had these long court battles. And I guess at some point she will either be vindicated or pack up her bags and maybe stay wherever she is.
That's true, but she has to prove, for example, and account how she came to be one of the richest individuals in her country and on the African continent. In a lot of cases, it doesn't work because it didn't work, for example, in Zambia. Mr. Frederick Chiruba, he personally told me that he rigged in Leve Patrick Mwanawasa. And Mwanawasa, after that, came after him. You have other situations where things have not looked good. You have situations, for example, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, where people tell you that the man who succeeded Joseph Kabila, a man called Felix Tshisekedi, that apart from pomp and the pageantry and having the rank and the title of president and the position, that he probably does not really have any authority.
But people could argue that he's beginning to crack the whip. For example, he has taken down his chief of staff who was fronted by the former president, his predecessor.
Good luck for him, because the last time I checked, Paul, if politics is anything to go by, you at least have to control the security forces. He doesn't seem to be controlling the security forces. You also have to control the National Assembly. He is definitely not in control of the National Assembly, where laws are supposed to be made. So when you look at the cabinet and you look at some of the most strategic, dockets, he doesn't control them. So it remains to be seen whether, in fact, he can successfully assert himself and begin to deliver on the promises he made to the people who elected him to that position.
Let's go back to Burundi. Let's talk about Pierre Nkurunziza. Pierre Nkurunziza is not just going into retirement. Apparently, he's going to become some kind of a king of some sort. He's going to be a supreme leader of some sort. How is that likely to play out? Like you correctly talked about some of the examples you gave about Tanzania, then Angola. This guy is perhaps going to even have more power, a supreme leader of Burundi. So does that mean he's, in a way, going to be in charge of the country?
We don't know. That is why I told you at the outset, Paul, that I am not a political prophet. I am an analyst. And the only way I can talk about people like Pierre Nkurunziza and what have you, I have to be guided by facts. Not innuendo, not speculation, not rumors, not the graveyard. You know, so I think that we have to be very careful reaching certain conclusions, taking us in certain directions. Politics is a very interesting game. I have often said that one of its finest definitions is that it is the art of all possibilities. And so anything is possible. So I think we should just be patient, just watch the developments, what happens. It's quite possible that Pierre Nkurunziza, yes, would remain very, very powerful, like Mwalimu Nyerere was powerful at some point, but it's also equally possible that just like José Eduardo dos Santos, a man who, by the way, was in power for more than 30 years,
37.
Eventually...
I think 37 years.
Well, more than 30 years. Yeah, he came to power, I think, in 1979? Yeah, when Dr. Neto, the man who was president when he died. Yeah, so let's just be patient. Let's not rush to make judgments based essentially on speculation.
Yeah, Shaka, there is a comment. There is a comment on that. Maybe let's go to that comment. It's from Jonathan. Shaka, good evening, Dr. Shaka. You seem to have a soft spot for the outgoing president of Burundi. Why can't you make the same argument about other leaders in Africa who have probably done better things than Nkurunziza? But from your argument, you seem to have a very soft spot for Pierre Nkurunziza. Why?
I don't think that I have a soft spot for any politician. I think that I said that I'm guided by facts. I have never interviewed Pierre Nkurunziza. He promised me an interview and never delivered.
This is what you get when you're working from home.
Really? Very interesting.
Somebody just photobombed my interview.
Yes. I do not have really what you would call a soft spot for him. I don't know him very much. I can only judge him by what he has either accomplished and what he has not accomplished. I think that in a world, in a region, for example, where you hardly see peaceful transitions of power from one individual to the other, even if it happens to be in the same political party, around that particular Great Lakes region, Paul, you have, for example, the Republic of Uganda. The Republic of Uganda has never experienced a peaceful transition of power from one president to another. And you have a man who came to power in 1986, President Yoweri Museveni, who, by every indication, was so contemptuous about African leaders who he said overstay in power.
Everybody was talking about how Pierre Nkurunziza didn't want to leave power, especially after that 2015 election. Everybody started calling him names, whatever, but he has proved people wrong. What lesson can these other leaders who have been around for a long time learn from Pierre Nkurunziza and probably the person that you just referenced, the Congolese president, Joseph Kabila? These are two young guys, arguably younger than most of these guys who have been in power for a long time. But for some reason, they have reached to a point and said, you know what, I've had enough and I'm stepping aside and letting other people or giving other people a chance.
I think that it is a good thing to serve and preside over a peaceful transition of power from yourself to someone else. It can be tempting, of course, to choose a successor, and that will probably be coming from your party. But it can also be interesting to cede power over someone that has actually been chosen by the people in an election that is considered to be free, fair, transparent, and credible. And some of those things have happened. For example, let's go to the Republic of Ghana. You have had situations where not only an incumbent president, John Dramani Mahama, was able to be defeated by a candidate from the opposition, Nana Akufo-Addo. He was able to concede defeat with grace. And life goes on.
Yeah, across in Nigeria, Jonathan.
Exactly.
Beaten by Buhari, and he seceded power, and
life goes on.
Right.
You have had situations like those in Benin, where a long-time dictator, Matthew Kareku, was able to hold an election, was defeated by Soglo, and he considered defeat with grace. And after one term, you can't believe this, he actually ran against Soglo, who was an incumbent president at that time, and defeated him. And then later, he was able to go home in retirement. There have been very encouraging signs in Africa. We have had some of those situations, for example, in Zambia. I mean, in Zambia, it has happened twice. Abiy Ahmed, the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, seems to be really my kind of a new breed of African leaders.
Yeah.
Let me say this if you want.
Okay, sure.
I had said that I do not have a soft spot for any politician. I think I apologize. I think I do. I, for example, did have a soft spot for Tanzanian President Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere. And to be very honest with you, as far as I'm concerned, it is a badge of honor to be associated with a champion of human rights like Mwalimu Julius Kambarage Nyerere.
I thought you were going to say champion of human rights, and you mentioned Pierre Nkurunziza.
I have
just kidding.
I also have a soft spot for Ghanaian founding president, the Osajefo, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah.
Let's talk about Malawi. What's going on in Malawi? A lot of people are not happy that the campaigns are going on amidst this coronavirus. People have literally refused to put in place the social distancing guidelines that WHO has recommended. So it's a very interesting scenario, what we've been seeing on the streets in Malawi.
It's very unfortunate that that is the way they are behaving. But again, when you look at the numbers that they have put out in terms of the infected people and those that have died, Corona doesn't seem to be a huge deal in Malawi. I was talking to a reporter who actually suggested that, in fact, a lot of people think that the lockdown is probably much more uh, because they say what is very important for them is if in fact they can have access to food so that they can eat. But I think that we really also have to give credit to the authorities in countries like Malawi to even allow an election under the circumstances. Because in other situations, you probably would have found someone postponing the election, or rather, someone, in fact, invoking a state of emergency so that they can rule under those terms. But in this particular case, at least they are trying at least to show that the government belongs to the people. It does not belong to the specific individual who is in office. And in the case of Malawi, I am encouraged by the fact that, for example, the judiciary system of Malawi has shown remarkable independence.
Let's go to another comment. Let's go to Gerald Zungu. The opposition parties in Malawi are telling people that there is no COVID in the country, but the government is simply using the issue to delay the elections. That is a problem.
When it comes to COVID-19, when it comes to the coronavirus pandemic, I have repeatedly said that people should listen to science. They should listen to facts. They should listen to public health experts and listen to officials who have been sanctioned to be able to address some of those issues. They should not listen much to politicians. They should not be misled, because at the end of the day, we should really be guided by data, guided by the facts, guided by science, not propaganda, not emotions, and not politics.
Malinyama Sereth, the poor keep voting, risking COVID and all that, and change never comes. The same old faces, the same old people are going to still to be in charge of Malawi after the elections. Your take on that?
Well, I will have to disappoint my brother that you see nothing endures except change. All we have to do is to learn how you have to manage it, because the only constant, as a matter of fact, is change. And someone might also tell you the only thing that is permanent is change, because society is not static, it is dynamic.
Jeremiah here in Blantyre, Malawi, says that our biggest problem in Malawi is not COVID-19. However, people are struggling to put food on the table. It's HIV, it's cholera, and other things that have hit us for a very long time.
I think that we can actually fight and defeat the virus, but while also at the same time doing whatever is necessary to make sure that we have unfettered access to food.
We've run out of time. We can leave it at that. I look forward to hosting you on another edition of Shaka Xtra Time. Thank you so much, Shaka.
Thank you very much, Nduguforo.
And to you all, our viewers, thank you so much for those comments. We look forward to having you on another edition of Shaka Xtra Time. Until then, so long from Washington.